All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Japan Club's official podcast. I am your host, well, one of them anyway, Yuki.
I'm Ernesto. This is the first time that I've come on the podcast. I'm the public relations officer at the Japan Club, and I'm going to be asking a lot of questions today. That's my position, basically.
I'm Jerry, and this is my first time as well. And I'm the treasurer of the Japan Club. And I'll be, the guy who talks.
Bruh. Just the guy. I'm Bryce. I was in the last episode. DC rep. Aha.
It's your boy Bryce, as they say.
Never do that to me again.
So,
Never.
Anyway, today's topic is video games in Japan, and this is a big category, you know? Like, when you think of video games, half of the ones you think of are probably Japanese. So let's just dive right in. We have a bunch of categories today. We have a bunch of things to talk about. So let's just kind of open it up to the floor and sort of, well, first of all, let's define them. What are video games, at least in relation to Japan anyway? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, in relation to Japan, I don't know really what that means, but
it's an oddly worded question, but let's
when I think about, Japanese video games, obviously, all of the Nintendo games that we grew up with, Mario, all of those Pokemon, I don't know. That's what I kind of think of, but I have very little experience with them, so I don't
know. Personally, I think of not only a lot of the companies that started in Japan with regards to making video games, but also some of the genres that are more common in the Japanese market. So a lot of rhythm games, certain like singing games, stuff like that, JRPGs, a lot of like classic genres, but not necessarily specific titles all the time.
So I've heard about, rhythm games, and, you mentioned a few other categories that I'm not really familiar with. What's a JRPG, for example?
So a JRPG is just a Japanese role-playing game. So the difference between a JRPG and a standard RPG is, well, there are a lot, but one of the most common is the combat style, and oftentimes the emphasis on like a lot of hard work for the progression that you get in the game. So in a lot of Western RPGs, you still have to work to get your character stronger and whatnot, but in JRPGs it's usually a little bit more emphasized and expected that you'll spend a bit more time to really work on your characters and put in the effort to really survive the more challenging combat encounters that the game will put you through.
Also, another defining aspect of JRPGs, which is kind of different from Western RPGs, is JRPGs tend to focus a lot on having unique characters as their protagonists. Like they're their own person, and they are not you. They are not they are not a player avatar. Like they can be on the silent side, generally speaking, but at the same time, they have their own unique character design. They have their own unique sort of people around them. In a Western RPG, you're kind of dropped into the world without much relation to yourself. And of course, these things change over time, and Western RPGs have adopted sort of the traditions of JRPGs. We can talk about that in the future, but things like The Witcher do take elements of JRPGs and bring them into the Western setting. Like Geralt is a character for the most part. That wasn't really something that a lot of Western RPGs did early on.
You could also say early on that JRPGs actually innovated the emphasis on a story, or at least like plot-driven gameplay.
Yeah.
A lot of the Western RPGs that were, on computers were probably like text-based or more focused on gameplay, just jumping in, having a quick session. But the JRPGs that showed up, at least on consoles early on, really decided to, put more effort into the story, who these characters are, what the setting is, and probably get more invested into actually like being immersed in the game. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
JRPGs are long. Very long.
Yeah, it's a really long time commitment.
Yeah, quintessential examples, JRPGs, things like the Final Fantasy series, those are pretty famous.
Massive.
And so the thing about JRPGs is that they're not defined by a consistent set of mechanics in the way that some other, like a shooter is defined by its mechanics.
Yeah.
But like a JRPG isn't really, because what Final Fantasy used to be was a turn-based RPG. You know, you'd take
Yeah.
it's a lot like Pokemon in a way. You had your unit management and team building. Whereas nowadays, a lot of JRPGs are much more sort of real-time action, 3D modeling kinds of games where you kind of move around in real time and attack things like a top-down sort of fighter.
That's
So
not to say that they all have gotten away from their roots. There are definitely some JRPGs like to, I guess, pull you back to how things used to be. Like Square Enix has released Octopath Traveler, which is more recent in terms of its release date, but a lot of the feel of it is very old in terms of the mechanics and the way you look at the game. Obviously, development quality is to current standards, and then you have Atlas with the Persona series. And so there's definitely a lot of like progress forward, but that doesn't mean that all JRPGs have kind of shed their past identities.
yeah,
So, speaking of roots, you know, my impression of Japanese video games is it starts around my childhood, but you know, before that, I have really no idea what went on. So, when did kind of video games in Japan start being popular, or when did they pick up?
well, video games themselves weren't a thing in Japan right up until around the like late '60s, early '70s, because I mean, you know, technology itself was evolving at a crazy rate around that time all across the world, especially in the U.S. and Japan. And so things like, you know, arcade systems where you'd play video games in a place that was separate from your own home, those became big around that time. And then we switched over to home entertainment systems, you know, things like the early, well, PlayStation, things like the very first Nintendo consoles and all that stuff. So all that stuff happened probably within the last like 40 to 50 years is really when things have been on an uphill climb ever since. Like in both here and in Japan, things are crazy with regards to consoles nowadays, super advanced and all that.
Hmm.
And so it's like JRPGs we've talked about, but also there's another form of video game that's really popular in Japan, which are the rhythm games, which we've talked about briefly. We mentioned them.
Yep.
Those are very much defined by their mechanics because those are very much, you know, they're very much about timing and they're about music a lot of the time. And so those things in Japan, they're very popular. And the big one that's
Scary.
very I might know is that one Taiko game, the drumming one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember playing that at an arcade once, and you know, something that kind of struck me was how different it was from I don't know, like anything I'd ever played before. Like normally, you have, I don't know, like a controller or some sort of device made for the game that's kind of small. I don't know, but at the arcade they have these like huge drums, and you know, I don't know how they make it work, but it's really something to like actually be playing like big drums, and you know, you like it's insane.
One thing I personally noticed with a lot of the rhythm games in arcades when I was in Japan was that none of them really work the same. Like they're all very different and have their own like I guess barrier to entry in that you need to be really good at reacting to the particular way they set up the controls.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of people who just go to these arcades and just get crazy high scores and perfect every single rhythm. And it's very impressive. It's very, I guess, time commitment heavy. But I find it interesting that there's such a diverse range of control setups for rhythm games.
So yeah, and I remember like just to go back to the history for a moment of the video games. I believe that according to sort of what we have down, around the 80s, there was a big crash with regards to video game. Jerry, were you the one who was researching that?
Yes.
Would you like to talk?
The video game crash of 1983 was a huge moment in the gaming industry, and it mostly happened in the US. In Japan, they noticed it, and they actually called it Atari shock because Atari was the company at the center of all this. But it mostly didn't affect them that much, but it certainly made an impact. And basically what was happening was there was a development of third-party developers So developers who aren't affiliated with the company directly making games for the system, right? But there were so many of them and so many independent developers that there wasn't any standardization. And there was, as a result, there was an oversaturation of the market, and there were a lot of, bad quality games. So the public generally lost kind of faith in the actual merit of this industry and started to not buying anything, basically. And
Mhm.
so this actually began the decline or so of Atari as one of the major video game giants. And this is where overgeneralizing, Japan stepped in, right? So the rise of the Titans, aka Nintendo, Sega. There's also Taito. They all just started developing their own, basically, foot in the market. Because Nintendo used to make what, Hanafuda cards from the
Yeah,
Yeah, they
actually.
were a board game and toy
but
company.
they jumped at that opportunity. And so the video game crash was the main. I don't know if you're aware of this, but you know how there's the Famicom, right?
Yeah.
And there's also the NES. Why do they
Mhm.
look so different? It's because internally they're basically identical, but the NES was basically an attempt at marketing a video game console not as an entertainment device, as a fun game console that people are used to. No, they wanted to market as a home computer that is that kind of fits into their usual drab, the other what their computers look like that are gray and a little beige.
So like a
It's not,
more professional looking image.
yeah, try to redefine their image, because at this point the public are yeah, I don't want a game console. That's garbage. But
well, and
it worked.
That's garbage.
well, and I mean, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but I think there's also, you can see some of that in recent years. Like if you go back I don't know what, 8 years to the Xbox 360, it kind of looked kind of I don't know. It had a weird shape, it glowed green, and I don't know, it had a bunch of toxic looking colors. And then now you have well, the latest Xbox is still the Xbox One, but they're coming out with new ones, and each time it's kind of a sleeker design, and there's less kind of, I don't know, color, and it's kind of just looks like a computer.
Everyone wants
a
a
desktop
hard drive out of Tron or something.
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that. What is Taito? I'm not sure if I recognize that company. I mean,
They're a huge arcade company.
Yeah,
Oh,
Taito
okay.
right now is just a major conglomerate at this point.
Yeah.
They were responsible for introducing Space Invaders. I mean, you've probably heard of that, right? It was the first arcade game to gain mainstream appeal.
Didn't Square Enix? I read that Square Enix bought Taito, and that surprised me. I didn't know they owned it.
I'd have to verify that, but there's
Let me
supply
check that,
chain, yeah.
because I remember seeing that somewhere, and I was surprised by that.
Invaders is a bit before my time.
They are involved with rhythm games currently, actually. If you're familiar with Groove Coaster, I think I've seen Taito in that. So.
Well, and going back to rhythm games, what makes, or I know about the taiko drum game, but Japanese rhythm games in general, what makes them different from, say, Western music games like Guitar Hero or Rock Band?
They're really, really hard.
Yeah, I would say because Japanese rhythm games focus on a certain style of music that I'm pretty sure you're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's faster, high BPM. There's EDM. There's a lot of remix style songs that I think that's what makes it have the opportunity for a higher skill ceiling. I mean, if you focus on Western music, it usually is a lower BPM. It's slower. Probably it's easier to play along with. But if you look at the high difficulty songs available in most Japanese rhythm games, you probably get really discouraged. Say, what am I listening to? But I want to play it,
It's weird to categorize a game, two different kinds of games based on levels of difficulty, because that is subjective, and it can be a bit difficult to judge that on sort of a standardized set. But I do think that there is a difference in sort of aspirational difficulty with regards to something like Guitar Hero versus something like the rhythm games in Japan, because in Guitar Hero, the developers aren't trying to say, how difficult can we make this game before they just get angry and quit? Whereas in Japan, it's really a test, and it's really about increasing the test.
Yeah.
Whereas, Guitar Hero is I want to try to imitate this guitar player as much as possible.
It's about how quickly they can give you carpal tunnel, to be honest.
Well,
and I confirmed Square Enix does own Taito.
Okay.
Oh. So the other thing is, you know, a lot of these rhythm games, I imagine, have competitive play, right?
They
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
a friend who's big into. There's this rhythm game called Osu, which is found online, which is
Oh, I
it's a
can talk
rhythm
about
game.
that.
People take it extremely seriously. It's just a tapping game where you have to tap along this pattern to the beat of music. And it can go from like really, really easy to extremely stupidly difficult. And there's like international competitions with huge amounts of prize money at stake. There's a
Wow.
whole community.
Some
out
people use OSU for training in FPS, which I find it makes sense because you have to be able to precisely move your mouse properly and whatnot. But it like
Unless you use the tablet.
unless you use a tab, whatever.
Then just
Okay.
play an FPS with a tablet, okay?
But just the fact that you can carry over some of the skills from certain games to others because
I mean, yeah, there's a
OSU
lot of
is
precision involved, right?
yeah.
That's probably the good word to sum it up. Like, like you say timing, but like when those timings are, I don't know, like milliseconds, even like less than milliseconds, it can, I don't know, be really. I just like the skill-based gameplay. That's kind of what the focus is, Japanese, right?
And one thing that I've been curious about, you know, for a while, because you know, for some of the really popular games that came out of Japan, for example, Pokemon, like you get the idea. Pokemon is like an abbreviation for like pocket monsters. Um, but one thing that's always baffled me is like, where did the Mario franchise come from? Like, it's a story about two Italian plumbers, you know, saving a princess. Like, you know, where did it come from, and you know, what's its origins? Like, you know,
If I'm
any of
I'm
you
just speaking off the cuff here, but yeah, Mario was originally a character in the Donkey Kong game,
Yeah.
and he actually didn't have the name Mario. He was actually named Jumpman, right? Kind of a popular fact.
Yeah.
And the name Mario was lended from, I think, an employee from like Nintendo America, right? Like the landlord, I believe, Mario Segal.
Yeah.
And yeah, they just ended up taking off of that with like Shigeru Miyamoto probably like had that, huge genius to take that one character and just create a whole franchise off of it. So,
That's insane. That's a pretty cool origin story. I didn't
Yeah.
even know, you know, that whole thing about Donkey Kong. So Donkey Kong was kind of like the first character in the Mario
Donkey
universe.
Kong was a villain back in the day.
Yeah,
He
wait,
was the
he-
first one to kidnap Princess Peach, bro.
Yeah.
Wait,
Actually,
was-
no, it wasn't Peach. It wasn't Peach. It was
It wasn't.
some other chick, right?
It was Rosalie, right?
It was yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, there's some complexity about that because according to this is what I've heard. According to the lore of that game, what happened was that
lore of
Mario.
The Valor.
Yeah, I know this is crazy. But
God, that's so funny.
was actually a circus owner, and Donkey Kong was a circus animal that broke out,
Yeah.
and so he was actually the villain in that game. If you think about it, so
Yeah.
there's things were weird before they started plotting out their structure. How Mario.
the earliest Donkey Kong game that I remember playing was the one on the Nintendo 64, where you kind of had to go through like a bunch of, I don't know, courses, and there was like crocodiles trying to like beat you up and stuff. That one was a really fun game. I remember that very fondly from my childhood.
Donkey Kong unfortunately is relegated mostly to. I mean, has there been a new Donkey Kong game in a while or not really?
A couple
think
years
so.
ago, I remember one.
It's the re-release on the Switch, I think.
Okay, because mostly people know him from Smash Bros. But
Yeah.
If you want a fun fact, the Game & Watch version of Donkey Kong, if I'm like recalling correctly, was the first like handheld clamshell design actually. So like they used to like the DS, 3DS, that kind of design.
Yeah.
Like that was the first instance basically. Like
Oh.
handheld.
So like I think that the Mario segue is actually a pretty good one because essentially he came out in like the mid '80s. So
Something like that.
right around the
Yeah.
time where they were kind of getting back up off the big crash and things
Yeah.
really began to pick up again in terms of the video game market. And I think
Yep.
it's kind of been on a steady sort of uphill climb to this day.
Mhm.
Like there are so many games nowadays, and video games as a genre have become so ubiquitous that we don't really question. Like there are people who still question them. Is violent video games still a thing, like a harmful thing?
You're too old to be playing video games.
But it's much more now than it ever was 10 or 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with the types of games that are out
Well,
now and the kinds of stories that are being told through some games.
I think that definitely is more so due to the advancements in technology for video games,
Yeah.
graphics and whatnot. There's games that you can play now that simply weren't possible
Oh
like
yeah, definitely.
with
Like, the
technologies
Virtual
from
Boy is what the Oculus Rift is sort of like trying to be the better version of. I mean, sure, Oculus Rift is
right.
Japanese, but
That's
like,
yeah, that's a really actually good important point in how hardware design actually affects game design, right?
yeah,
Because back then there wasn't a lot of resources to like actually take advantage of. And so game developers, in my opinion, were actually more ingenious with how they use like these special tricks in order to like utilize their resources to like the greatest potential.
yeah,
Yeah.
But with the advancements in hardware with like more memory, more space, I think there's a bit of a lazy twinge with like how developers sometimes like pool like like their what is it, game assets just like uncompressed, and like it takes it, increases load times. They don't really like
Yeah. They
they
don't
don't really like take that
optimize.
into advantage. Yeah.
Yep.
But
Yeah, and I mean not just on the hardware side, but I remember once that I did like a summer course on 3D design, and there's things like Unreal Engine that
mhm,
developers can use now to make the process for developing games much shorter. And I think
yep.
that kind of goes to your point where sometimes it's kind of lazily put together, but um, most of the time it results in really high quality games that can be produced, I think, more rapidly than they were before.
yeah. No, game engines are a huge thing for video game development. That back then, you kind of just have to work your way from the ground up, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Exactly.
kind of just put some things together and hope that it doesn't break the system. Like back in the day, you couldn't have more than I think four. It's either three or four running audio tracks at a time.
Yeah,
So what composers had to do was manage to get a melody, an implied harmony, and a running rhythm in like only three or four tracks. I think it was three because three sounds a lot harder than four. Because four is not that bad, but three is
And
tough.
sometimes you only had, a few sound styles to choose from, right? Like a
Yeah,
sawtooth and like the square wave.
yeah.
So it brought in that distinct, 8-bit, 16-bit like sound that you're used to.
yeah.
But it's all we had at
It reminds me of like the Kahoot music.
Like I could still probably do the entire Kirby soundtrack if I really put my mind to it. Like they were just something
Oh, Gourmet Race?
everything, man, especially the earlier ones. But there was something memorable about the simplicity of that old music, and it's great to see how we've really evolved from that. Even with our expanded resources, people are trying to make those memorable tunes. Not just in Japan but in the West as well.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
one thing that I'm curious about, I don't really know what the situation is like in Japan. I know here in the West, the video game market, it's primarily consoles and PC, but it's been shifting more heavily towards PC lately, or at least that's how I see it. But what's the case in Japan? What are people playing on? What's popular over there?
In terms of like growth income, arcades actually still dominate from what I can tell. And it speaks volumes because even a casual player of video games would probably be fine with walking in an arcade for like a few hours and just having a fun time. And then, so it actually has like that wide mass appeal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, second to that, I probably, just speaking from experience, right? I probably say mobile gaming is still probably
Yeah.
predominant.
Yeah. It's call it, yeah.
There's a huge focus on mobile games, right?
And like it's
Yeah.
crazy with the thing about the arcades is like the reason why they've kind of fallen off in the United States is for the most part they're harder to come by, and there's
Yeah.
it's a lot more spaced out. In Japan, all big cities, high density, and every mall basically has an arcade on the second or third floor. So a lot of places can pull a lot, and there's a lot of visual information to take in.
Yeah.
Well, and this is an idea. I might be wrong, but since Japan is still like such a heavily cash-based society, I think it's more viable to have arcades like in Japan. I guess because
Yeah.
Like
the
physical medium? Yeah, you could be right.
systems,
Yeah. I could see that being a
Like-
factor, definitely.
Like I feel like here in the U.S., if you open an arcade, like
Yeah.
people who would go to an arcade would have to like first, I don't know, get cash. And I feel like a lot of people don't carry around cash anymore, especially with the pandemic.
There are systems that have been built to get around that. Like there are membership cards that can store money. These
Right. Yeah.
credit cards, but yeah, it's not exactly ideal.
Yeah.
I agree with that. But, Japan is big on mobile games. Home consoles are still a thing for the most part, but not to the extent that it is in the West. Like, they're the high level gamers in Japan, obviously, that have those PCs in the same way that you would in the West. There's a lot of crossover there.
Mhm.
But yeah, arcades are kind of a big separator.
Interesting. Yeah,
So-
I've only ever been to like 2 in Japan, and it was only to play the Taiko game. Like I didn't play any other game.
Yeah,
but
there are some, like the claw machine games are rough.
oh, actually,
Bro, the claw machine games is its own like market. Because
yeah,
what people will do is they'll go to the claw machine and like the really good ones. So I actually spoke to someone who did this when I was in the arcade.
Yeah.
Just to preface, just for people who might not know, claw machine games are, because those aren't as common here in the US, but essentially you have like a controller and a button. You have to move a mechanical claw and attempt to grab an object of some worth that you want, pull it up, and then drop it into the hole where you can then collect it. It's kind of, I mean, to be fair, they're not that rare even in the United States, but like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they're also called like crane games. Or,
Yeah, if
Yeah.
I want to make a distinction, I think that like the claw machines here, right, are pretty much rigged, right?
oh, yeah.
Are you
Well,
trying to-
I've never won like one.
Like it's randomized on whether like a claw is like has a strong or weak grip. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I think in Japan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the like crane games and like games where you try to win a prize, I think are more like have that ideology where it's like chipping away at something, right?
Yeah.
Like, remember that prize that's like stuck between some like two things and you have to like just gradually try and move it like off the edge or something? That's why I'm
Yeah.
thinking like it's not like random like rigged. It's more like skill-based like determination or something like that. And it is like a test, right?
Yeah, it's definitely more like you chip away at it, but
Yeah.
the size of the chips depend on how good you are.
Exactly.
But yeah, like I was saying, what these guys do is they'll go in and they make sure no one can see them when they do this because they don't want people to know the exact position that they're using to get the objects. So they'll cover the crane up to be all up against the machine basically, and they'll like flick it like once or twice and get the most valuable object that's in the machine, which sometimes can be something of upwards of $100 because these are very hard to get, like limited figures or figures that aren't necessarily limited, but you have to pay a lot of money to get.
Yeah.
And they'll collect all of these, take them to a pawn shop, and sell them for profit. So the amount of money they're spending on the game is less than the amount of money they're making from selling these various figures and books and whatnot.
They're flipping claw machine prizes, essentially.
You have to be
Literally, they are
pretty
flipping
insane at
claw
claw
machines.
machine to make that profit.
I've seen them. I saw one guy walk up to a machine.
There's also
hit
those
it,
machines
like 3
you can-
times. Done.
There's those machines you can play with like online, right? Like through the cloud.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's what I was gonna
Yeah.
mention. I saw like a video on an app called like Tariba or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like you basically operate a real crane from your phone, and the crane is in Japan, but you operate it from your phone.
Never
Yeah.
heard of this.
Yeah.
And
I've
then
actually played
like
it.
you get the prizes, and they get delivered like worldwide, free shipping. I think that's like such a mind-blowing idea. Like, I'm operating a crane in Japan.
Remote
like
crane
I get the prize shipped to me in America.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That was just the alarm just now. That's our signal. But I think yeah, for the most part, that's a good picture of sort of Japanese current day Japanese gaming industry and gaming sort of thing. Let's talk a bit about sort of the publishers and the big ones, the influential ones, of how they may have individually contributed to video games as a sort of whole. Because I think it's better to understand like sort of each company has their own unique contribution to the world of video games, not just in a worldwide sense.
Of course.
So yeah, big one, Nintendo. Like Nintendo's been around forever. Like what do you guys think the major impacts have been? I mean, there's a lot to go over, but still.
I mean, like I said, they were kind of single-handedly for solving the whole video game crash I was talking about earlier. And so,
Like what specific elements of their game design do you think are still in use in other companies and other games today? Like I'm always curious about that.
Well, one thing from my experience that I noticed is that Nintendo, in many cases, like they bring about pretty groundbreaking innovations, that kind of spread throughout, the gaming world. And then, it happens every so often. Like the earliest one I can remember is like the Wii, and
Yo.
the kind of involvement of player motion in like the video games.
Yeah.
And after the Wii, like the Xbox came out with like their kinetic thing. I forget what it was
Kinect.
called, and PlayStation
Pretty
had
sure
their
that's
own
exactly
version
what
as
it's
well.
called.
That's
But
true.
But
Most
it's-
but yeah, I'm pretty sure the Wii was kind of like the first one to bring player movement into
Nintendo,
the video
in the
game.
mass market, yeah. It was a widely successful
uh,
console.
Yeah,
Nintendo takes risks.
That's true.
and lately it's the Switch, that kind of portable device that can also be like a fixed console. I think that was pretty amazing. So yeah.
My thing with Nintendo in particular, I don't think they at least not with their established franchises, they don't take as many risks as they do with their hardware. Which I would prefer them to take a few more creative liberties with what they're doing in terms of the titles they're releasing. But I would say that the strongest thing for Nintendo is that they are everyone's childhood. Like the games that are released on Nintendo consoles, people remember for the rest of their lives.
Right.
Like this generation of adults who grew up on Pokemon and Mario and Zelda, like that, like the standard expectation of this old guy who plays video games is that he loves Nintendo because that's his childhood. He grew up with that.
Mhm.
And I think that's the strongest pull that Nintendo has. And that's definitely one of the reasons one of the complaints Nintendo gets a lot is that they want new IPs because they've been, releasing Mario games for years and Zelda games for years, not only because people love them, but because it works.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I was going to say that's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because that kind of encourages stagnation by just living on like brand names alone.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see that with like, the Pokemon franchise, how that's turning out.
Yeah.
Well, and like how many Mario Kart games have there been now? It's been like
like 8 or
8.
9.
10?
If you want to count
For counting
Deluxe
DS?
separate, but
Oh,
it's just
yeah.
8, yeah.
It's a lot.
The numbers are actually true. Like there's no like 3,
Wait,
4, 5,
really?
but yeah.
Shit.
They're still counting, even if there's not a number. Like 7 and 8, yeah. Like, it's actually
I didn't think I thought they were actually all numbered, so I figured DS was separate.
No, if you have like Double Dash, like it's not given a
Yeah,
number, but
it's not
it's
given a
still
number, but
counted in
it's
the
still-
lineup. Yeah.
Okay, I knew Double Dash was counted. I just thought DS wasn't for some reason.
It
wow.
was.
I mean, even on a sort of intellectual property standpoint, they've dominated the market so much over the last 30 years that like you can't really like if you go look into like crappy sort of indie games and stuff that you see, they're like there's a lot that are based off like platformers. Like platformers were a thing before Nintendo kind of really took it off, but like after the era of Nintendo, it really like platformers were huge for a while. Then things like the sort of monster collecting thing became a thing that everybody wanted to jump onto, Like I won't say that everything was inspired by Pokemon, but things like those games where, because Japan has always had those games where you like raise monsters and stuff since before Pokemon. But
I remember. What was it? Like Tamagotchi, and that was like
Yeah.
that was like a little pocket thingy, right?
Like, I don't have proof that Neopets is based off Pokemon. I just don't.
On the note of indie games, something else that I think is worth noting. This doesn't explicitly pertain to Japanese games. I think it's more of a worldwide thing, but it's still related here. Is that recently indie games have been gaining a lot of traction. And Nintendo, which I guess it does connect to a Japanese company, is playing a role in that and releasing a lot more indie titles on the Switch. But I think it's really a sign of how far games have come. That there are so many, not only just so many indie developers, but also so many high quality indie games coming out and being appreciated by the wider video game audience.
Yeah,
I think it's also probably propelled by the fact that they have a platform, market their like game, right? That's like the second part of you have to get people to play your game, right? So having that opportunity, like I would say like Steam, right, as well. But these big companies that want to host this sort of content, like promote it, is actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, Nintendo's big. Let's move on to Sony. How has Sony been doing in terms of video game development? I mean,
PlayStation.
I mean, I think they mostly focus on the hardware aspect. I don't know many Sony titles.
I mean, their first party games are pretty
I-
renowned, right? Like,
The only one I can think of is like,
I don't-
I guess like the Spider-Man.
there's God of War.
That's only
there's-
because they own the character, and so
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they actually still develop a ton of games, but
Yeah, they do.
which ones?
I don't want to be wrong here, but yeah, there's the like basically the things you think of like with PlayStation exclusives. Those are most of the time first party, like driven by the Sony studios that you always see.
Oh, I see.
I can
Yeah,
look it up while
PlayStation
you're.
is huge, just in general. Its
Yeah.
competition with Xbox has propelled both to increasing levels of technological fidelity.
Back in the day
Yeah.
of Call of Duty Black Ops, like the first one,
Mhm.
I thought PlayStation would definitely like have or come out on top of Xbox and Microsoft, because back in the day the PlayStation Network was free and Xbox Live was not. But I
Mhm.
think now they're both pay based
That's-
subscriptions.
I would still say that I'm not saying this as a person who's particularly biased towards PlayStation because I'm not,
Mhm.
but I would still say on average PlayStation wins just because of the power of some of the exclusive titles that they get, in addition to the reputation that Microsoft has.
Yeah,
A
right.
lot of people hate Microsoft, and it, I would say, has given Sony an edge.
Like,
Um,
I would generally rate that first party titles for PlayStation are better, but that's just because Bloodborne is a game that exists. But like the argument that would typically be said in response is just play PC. You can get all the games that way anyway.
Just play PC, forehead.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
PC is still supreme to both consoles.
Well, that's because you can customize it to be as technologically advanced as you want
Yeah,
within your
that's
budget.
true.
So you can do whatever. Like there's no
Mhm.
limit. And
That
Yeah.
new graphics card though, XD.
Yeah.
It's
And
kinda
also
powerful.
PC has like I think it has more capabilities for like new kinds of games, like something that
mods.
I think has been getting like
And
more
mods.
popular, or at least like from my perspective, because I bought one is racing games, and you can do racing games on consoles, but there's limitations that come with that. Like you don't have same capacity for like extensions and I don't know, adding more peripherals to your setup. So yeah, I think
Like,
that's
really the
one
only way to
reason.
settle the debate is to say like PC is better for people who know what they're doing and know what they want to push in terms of limitations.
Mhm.
Whereas console people are much more, I just want to play the game. I don't really want to think too hard about it.
Yeah.
Right.
So like there'll never be a settled debate because it's never going to be, one's not never going to be objectively better than the other.
Hmm.
Another thing to consider is the price point, because for PCs
Oh, yeah.
to get to, at least it's better now than it used to be, but for a PC to like really push the envelope, you need to invest some money.
Yeah.
They're basically two different businesses,
Yeah.
on a object standpoint. Like
Mhm.
consoles have always have the best price per performance ratio because they're sold at a loss, right? They're
Yeah.
almost always sold at a loss in order to like recuperate with game sales, kind of that business
Yeah.
model. But with PCs, you're getting like like cutting edge probably, but like high degree of customization. But from that you get, I don't know, in terms of game developers, you get a wide variety of platforms to develop for, right? Or like configurations. But for consoles, you focus on one specific like hardware, right? So it's easier to develop for. So it's just two different things that are like to keep in
That's
mind.
interesting.
Like,
I didn't know that consoles were sold at a loss for the most part.
Yeah, because they have to account for development expenses, production expenses, and just the fact that consoles are very powerful. Like let's not undermine that. Just because PCs
Exactly.
are like in their own league does not mean that consoles aren't actually really, really high tech.
Mhm.
But given like the amount of money you're paying for them, it doesn't add up for like what you're actually getting. Which
Yeah.
is why it's pretty easy to call if they're sold in a loss. And if you do look at the numbers that are released, I'm pretty sure they confirm that they're sold at a reasonable loss on average.
All right. I feel like we shifted slightly away from the topic of Sony. So let's move to Taito and sort of what their impact is. I mean, it's still a great talk, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, I know, you're good.
So
I think we basically hit on that earlier. I mean, Taito at this
Yeah.
point, I think, is deeply inset into the arcade market, which is why
Yeah.
most people probably aren't really aware of that. They're like a lesser known at this point. but
Yeah.
they still are very influential. I think it's
Mhm.
What are they
You'll
doing?
see you'll see Taito locations everywhere in
Yeah.
Japan. Like I didn't know Taito existed until
Oh,
I
yeah.
got there, but like the arcades that I saw plenty of Taito
Yeah.
buildings and games and whatnot that were in the arcades
Yeah.
themselves.
Now that you mention it, I do remember seeing that word spread across malls. I just kind of mentally ignored it because I never go to arcades.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You don't think about it.
I have no idea what Taito is, so I can't speak to the president.
No, you're fine. You're
They're
fine.
big in Japan, not so much in the West, which I guess that
Yeah.
explains a lot, actually. 'cause
Yeah.
Most of my knowledge on video games does come from the West anyway. So
So
since you're-
besides that one, the last big one, what would you say? Well, no, there's plenty of other big ones, but I guess Square Enix is like the next one, right?
no,
Oh,
next
Square.
Namco. The next
Oh
one,
yeah.
which
Next one on the actual list.
my only experience
I
with
set up.
Bandai is that they made the Ultimate Ninja Storm games for the
Oh wait, is that what was that?
Namco Bandai. Well,
Oh yeah, Namco is Ultimate Ninja Storm 4 Naruto.
yeah, that's the only experience I have
Yeah.
with it. What, like, do you guys know what else? What big things that
I
they
They
have it
also
pulled
made
up,
the
actually.
Pac-Man games, if that makes
Yeah, Tekken, the Gundam
Ah.
games, the Tales series, Soul Calibur, Katamari, Ace Combat, and Taiko.
Oh, they made a lot. Yeah, I know.
I forgot they made the Taiko
And they have-
game.
They have
Wow.
licenses to a lot of anime series, so they're probably marketing off of that. But
So, what would you say their impact in the video game market has been? Like, I mean, like Tekken and stuff. That's big impact. Like the sort of fighting games they've become their own genre of video gaming for the most part. Would you say they started it, or would you say like some other company started it?
Well-
it's a mixed bag.
What was the first really popular kind of like combat game was what, Street Fighter?
I assume it was Street Fighter.
See, you would assume Street Fighter, but I actually don't know which one was released first.
I did
I'm
not
gonna
research
front.
fighting games, actually.
Yeah, that's the only. I didn't look into that at all because I didn't think it would
We
bring it
completely
up.
glossed over that.
It's pretty niche.
I know stuff. I don't.
who plays them, so yeah.
I know about them like in the current era, but I have no idea what games started it or what order they were released.
Okay,
I just know.
apparently the first fighting game was called Heavyweight Champ, which was released in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And like they've been around for a while, but like apparently, so in 1987 they released Street Fighter, and then in 1991 they released Street Fighter 2. And I think Street Fighter 2, according to sort of what I read up, is kind of the thing that really made things big.
Yeah, it was Street Fighter 2.
Yeah.
And so yeah, ever since then, and then things like Tekken came out to sort of rival that, I guess.
So Tekken came out after Street Fighter then.
I mean,
So, because my only thing is I don't know which series came out when. I just know how they
Tekken came out 3
progressed.
years after Tekken came out 3 years after Street Fighter 2. So
Okay.
Yeah, but like I mean Namco Bandai is with the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm 4 and other games like it, I think they've really made combat games more popular by adapting kind of I guess anime franchises and
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of
other
Yeah, there's a lot more
mediums.
focus on pop culture, I think, with how they like market their stuff.
Mhm.
All right. Let's see. Next up, Sega, big one.
Ooh,
Oh,
Sonic.
Sega.
I just remember
Sega.
Sonic.
Don't even need to. Yeah.
Sega's been around for, I mean, they were the ones that made the first video game in Japan, so they've been around for a while.
Mhm.
Look, my only thing with Sega is remember when they were relevant?
I-
remember when Sonic was good on like consistently good.
Yeah,
I remember playing the Sonic video games on the PSP, and that's kind of like the last thing I remember from Sega. I haven't.
I used to love Sonic when I was a kid.
I
Giants
haven't.
for a
Yeah.
long time, and then the Dreamcast went. The Dreamcast didn't, got canceled.
Mm.
Sonic as a character lost a lot of popularity because that generational skip.
Yeah.
And by the time he was around again, he was too irrelevant to really do anything. His
I wouldn't even say
attitude-
it was just that. It was
The attitude was
also
ridiculous.
yeah. I would say it wasn't even just that. I would say it's the shift in how they designed their games. So I think something that really really hurt Sega in terms of the Sonic IP
was the Xbox 360 Sonic the Hedgehog game.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
That hurt them a lot, and they felt that for years.
Well, and
because it made everyone second guess any future approaches they made with regards to the series. Because even when they released a game that wasn't bad, like Sonic Colors, for instance, not even a bad game. I played it. Other people who played it said it was pretty decent. But people didn't buy it because they still had that bad taste in their mouth from how glitchy and how morally questionable that one game was.
yeah.
What was the impact of Sega back when it was relevant? What would you say it was? I know very little about Sega. Like, I've only played one Sonic game.
Well, I just know that they're still plastered all over the place in Japan.
Yeah.
Whenever you go to like those really busy kind of arcade towns.
Yeah,
or,
they
like,
still have a strong foothold in arcades.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And they're-
definitely arcades.
I'd say, like, from my experience, right, they're really prevalent in stuff like the Yakuza series, right? That's like one of their like main drivers at this point. And the
I didn't
Project
even
Diva
know that
series.
was Sega.
Yeah,
Project Diva, Sega,
yeah,
Sega.
Project Diva series is
that was
also
good.
still pretty big with the Vocaloid craze.
Mhm.
Besides that, yeah,
Phantasy Star is doing pretty well. They have that MMO that's been around for like 13 million years.
yeah.
Yeah, Phantasy Star Online.
Yeah, I've only played Phantasy Star Zero, which is a single player game.
Yeah.
They had a gotcha game.
Like,
That's
from
a
what
gotcha
I
game.
know of Sega, like in general, they were sort of the big rival of Nintendo
Yeah, I would say
right
so.
up until they had the Genesis, I believe, right?
Well, and what's going on with like Smash Bros and like all the Sonic Mario games? Like, what's the deal
Those
with
are
that?
probably just cross collaboration games they made to sort of.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
wouldn't
the
think.
Olympics.
Yeah, those are just probably for marketing purposes. They probably
Yeah.
have a deal where they agree to split whatever profit or whatever IP to sort of make that even. But those games, those crossover games have been around for some time, I think.
hmm
But yeah,
Sonic is pretty OP in Smash Bros. When he
Bro.
turns yellow.
When he turns yellow and runs your fade.
Yeah. He goes Super Saiyan.
I wanna reach for the.
unfortunately, most
Live and learn.
Da-da-da!
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Square Enix now. How is Square
Okay.
Enix into the market? I feel like we have a lot to say for this one.
I know nothing
Square
about the topic, so I'll let you
Enix.
guys take it.
So Square Enix made Final Fantasy. That's a good way. That's a good place to start.
That's a start.
Chris, do you want to?
So yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with Square Enix. But that aside, they are, I would say, a really good example of, I guess, the diversity that you can get out of looking at a Japanese company's development and whatnot, and like the various games that they released, especially with regards to JRPGs, because that's definitely something that they have a hilariously strong foothold in and very strong reputation for. One of the almost universally all-time favorite games of a lot of people is Chrono Trigger. That's a Square Enix title. And one of the reasons it's so timeless for a lot of people, and this is something that carries over into other games, so Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, things like that, like other RPGs, is the story being so integral to the experience of the game, the combat system being very customizable and detailed, and the music focusing on developing an atmosphere. And I know that's like me digging specifically into, I guess, a company a bit more than we have before, but I'm also kind of trying to connect this to JRPGs, because I think it's a quintessential look at what you can expect from like big name games in a particular genre. You kind of see the best aspects of it are often the defining aspects of the genre.
Yeah,
At least in my
I agree with
experience.
that. Square Enix is, when you think Square Enix, you think JRPGs. So
Yeah.
they've been massive in the development not only of JRPGs in the modern day, but like they continue to lead sort of. I mean, to the extent that they have. They've had some fumbles over the years. Final Fantasy 15 wasn't exactly the greatest game in the world, but you know.
That was a development nightmare. Oh my god, that's what you don't do.
But yeah, so Square Enix, they're kind of hit a point, a low point right
Mhm.
now, I would say. But for a time, yeah, they defined what it meant to be a JRPG, and Western developers took note of that. A lot of them have JRPG elements to this day.
I would actually kind of disagree with them being at a low point. I think they've recovered a decent amount, especially looking at some of their other titles. Because for as
What are the titles?
FF14 is doing insanely well. Final Fantasy 14 is their MMO for Final Fantasy,
Oh, I see.
and it is in a really good state right now, both development-wise and fan base-wise. It's been expanding a lot over the course of the past year. Like a lot, especially with quarantine, a lot of people have flooded to the game, so much
Yeah.
so that they've made the vast majority of the game free for people, so they can really experience the game and decide if they want to buy it, because it's subscription based like World of Warcraft, another MMO.
Yeah.
And then of course their other titles are also, I would say, doing reasonably well. So while they were at a low point, I think they've recovered personally, but they're not as dominant as they used to be. Also, Final Fantasy VII Remake happened. Enough said.
To clarify for those of you listening who don't do video games as much, first of all, thank you for staying for this long.
Literally.
MMO, typically shortened of MMORPG, just means mass multiplayer online role-playing game. So those are just games where you play with a bunch of people in the same kind of server, and you all sort of fight together.
Mhm.
Generally, or you could kill each other. There are different kinds.
Yeah.
And so yeah, actually, in terms of time, we don't have too much time left. So let's just kind of go through the rest of this in broad strokes. Did you have anything to say besides that, Bryce, or were you sort of?
I mean, I was just giving an overview of Square Enix because I like the company and I dislike some of their decisions, but I also like other things that they've done. So I wanted to give a good overview of what they've done for the industry.
That's fine. So in terms of other big companies people might have heard of, there's things like Capcom, which made the Street Fighter games. They're huge. They've, obviously Street Fighter, a couple other games that they've created that are still big to this day. What are some other famous Capcom games?
Residential Evil is also the Ace. And they collaborated with
Resident
Marvel
Evil's
versus
big,
Capcom,
definitely.
right?
And then Marvel versus Capcom, yeah.
Yeah, so they're mostly in sort of those fields of fighting games for the most part, and a couple other things as well. Konami, they made the Metal Gear series. I'm sure everyone here has heard of the Metal Gear series. Solid Snake and all that.
Absolutely.
Snake!
Those
Hiding
are influential in their own
under
right.
a box.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they did stealth games. Probably a lot of modern stealth games probably took notes from Metal Gear.
Yeah.
Story-wise, they're very influential.
Mm-hmm.
Metal Gear games are some of the most well-written ones.
Yeah, people love the Metal Gear series. It's very long, but a lot of people really appreciate the story and the gameplay experience of it. So that's definitely one of their most popular titles, I would say, at least from what I currently can remember.
Yeah. From Software, they made the Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Demon Souls series. And
that was something that surprised me so much. I had no idea Dark Souls was a Japanese game.
Very Western looking for a Japanese game.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I was like.
I feel like that's a thing.
I mean, it was as surprising if you had told me Red Dead Redemption was a Japanese game. I did not expect that at all.
Yeah, I mean, mechanically
imagine Red Dead Redemption being a Japanese game. That'd be
mechanically speaking, the Dark Souls is hugely influential in terms of video game development. There are so many Souls-like games that exist nowadays.
Yeah.
Things like the term "this game is the Dark Souls of this genre" is a statement.
Yeah, the fact that that's an expression.
Yeah,
it shows how influential Dark Souls was as a franchise to influence game development.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. And so, that was all about difficulty and about punishing players in an attempt to challenge them. So,
Yeah, and it rewards you. And another thing that I think is worth noting about Dark Souls is the way it inverts the expectations of storytelling.
Yeah.
So I've mentioned before in other examples, like with Square Enix and what was it? Some of the Nintendo games, I think, that the way they tell stories is very important. But I didn't explain how they do it. So oftentimes storytelling is very direct. It's not necessarily exposition all the time, but it's very, you can tell when you're getting information, and it's
story
given to
stuff
you
happening
freely.
to your face.
Yes, but in Dark Souls and Bloodborne as well, the story is something you have to find and figure out.
It's
You
very
get little entries from items, or you have to go out of your way to talk to this one NPC or fight this one boss who's way out of the way to get this extra piece of lore to really put together the world.
Mhm.
And that's something that games hadn't done to that point in time. And now it's honestly a common expectation when you go into a game to go out of your way to find these extra details, because developers are more willing to put them in because they know people will look for them now.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
impact of storytelling on Dark Souls is crazy.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the big takeaways, at least that I got from our conversation. I didn't know a lot about Japanese video games going in, and I obviously knew about the big titles, from Nintendo and Sega and the likes, but the fact that they're still having such a big influence on video games worldwide today is something that really surprised me.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Atlas. I don't know much about them. What did they do?
They're a
Persona.
company that have found their cash cow. Yeah.
I've never played Persona.
That's what they're known by most people for. Persona and Shin Megami Tensei.
Okay, so RPG.
They also made the Trauma Center series, which
Yeah.
might not a lot of people know about, but
Hmm.
they've definitely found their niche.
Yeah.
The Persona series, like starting with 3, right, is definitely when it started to gain like popular attention.
Mhm.
And with 4, the meme is that like 4, they've milked the hell out of how many spin-offs there's in that game.
Bro, there's a dancing game for
Which I have platinum.
Bro, so on the side
geez.
note for Persona, I find it very interesting because the music in Persona is one of the defining characteristics for a lot of people. It's just how
Exactly.
high quality it is. The music is so good that they released a dancing game with all the music, obviously, and
Yep.
people paid for it and didn't call it a scam
Wow.
because it was actually good.
And then they made 2
wanted
more.
it. And then they made 2 more.
They made 2 more. Yep. So yeah, they're basically known for Persona. It's for those who aren't like familiar with it, it's basically Pokemon with demons / like spirits.
Persona.
Yeah, I know nothing about it, but that sounds like a
Bro,
perfectly
someone
reasonable
once
explanation.
said,
And they also have the crossover with what is it? The Fire Emblem, right?
Oh yeah.
Fire
what-
Fire Emblem.
Sharp?
Uh,
Or no,
that- that
no,
was Rhythm
Tokyo,
Game.
Tokyo Mirage
Yeah,
Session.
Tokyo
Sharp
Mirage
Entry.
Session.
That was it. Okay,
Yeah.
so a more elucidating explanation might be it's Pokemon, but it's your like spirit soul thing that does the fighting for you.
Yeah.
And it's
So
like,
it's like the Golden Compass.
yeah, but they're humanoid.
Bro.
Right?
Okay. Okay, I got
But
it.
yeah, it's kind of like the Golden Compass. It gets hurt.
And if you're ever playing Persona
Yeah.
and you're like, I want something darker and with demons, then yeah, that's Shin Megami Tensei.
Literally.
Okay.
It's also, if you want to play something that will make you hate yourself, play Shin Megami Tensei, like the hardest difficulty.
Exactly. Yeah.
Platinum Games, what did they do? I don't know much about it.
That's
So, okay.
my. That's where I.
Yeah, my boy.
Yeah. They're the main driver is the Musou genre, right? The hack and slash game.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, and
one, big
my
one.
my game, Nier Automata, like near and dear to my heart.
Yep.
They were all responsible for that. Yeah.
Nier Automata is great. No, Nier Automata is amazing. We
So-
can have a whole episode about Nier Automata.
Yeah, they also made Astral Chain.
Astral Chain. Yeah. That was,
So note on Platinum Games, for those who don't know any of those titles that we mentioned for Platinum, Platinum is known for just how innovative and fun their combat systems are.
Okay.
So in these games, your goal is to obviously beat the crap out of everything that's in your way and enjoy the plot while you're at it. What Platinum does is they really challenge the player to get creative with the various tools that are at their disposal. So in Nier, in Devil May Cry, especially in Astral Chain, there are some crazy combos you can set up where you're just chaining different moves together to really like efficiently and swiftly deal with whatever threat's being thrown at you. And at the same time, it's not supposed to be easy for you. So in the case of Nier, it's we're going to get into this genre later, practically a bullet hell, where there's a bunch of enemies in your way and things flying at you. So you really have to be careful so that you don't like get killed instantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, their main focus is like skill-based gameplay, but even if you're a novice, it just feels badass. It feels smooth and it feels responsive, right? Like
Yeah.
Funky, they're the opposite of Funky.
All right. So we have probably less than 5 minutes left on this. So, so what we intended for was a section where we sort of talk about sort of the specialized genres that of video game that Japan itself tends to specialize in. So, so we'll just try to go through this quickly, but then what I kind of want to do to wrap this all up is to talk about the impact of Japanese video game culture on the West and sort of the world in general. So just to briefly talk about, so we've talked about JRPGs, we've talked about MMOs, platformers like Mario are huge. Then there's things like visual novels, which are pretty much just books that you click through, where it's mostly dialogue based, but there's characters that tell stories. And for the most part, they're similar to dating sims. In fact, there's a lot of overlap. Visual novels can be extremely effective vessels for storytelling. There's some very big ones out there. Things like Fate Stay Night, for instance, are huge in terms of the impact on storytelling. There's an entire field of good storytelling you could find in analyzing visual novels.
I saw somebody play a Colonel Sanders visual.
I've heard about that one. Yeah, that one was
a Kentucky Fried Chicken one. I thought that was pretty funny.
that one is
Another thing with visual novels is that what makes it separate from obviously just reading a light novel or a book or something is that, one, they're often voice acted.
Yeah.
Two, there's art for you to like really look at and be in the scene in the moment while things are happening.
Yeah.
And there's also usually decent music accompaniment. And I think it's supposed to give you that slide by slide experience. It's not like watching a show, but it's more reading a book with reading a manga would be more accurate. Reading a manga with a few extra details to make it more immersive and engaging.
There's also the concept of routes, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you have control over the story to most of the time in order to decide where you want the story to go. It's a choose your own adventure book, but probably way better,
Yeah.
You don't have to if you make this decision, please flip to page 27.
It might mean your certain doom.
All right. So then there's Bullet Hell, which Bryce brought up briefly. Essentially, you're a tiny ship or a tiny thing. You have to dodge a bunch of bullets that are displayed in some pattern. And
a bunch is an understatement.
A good example, Toho Project, which is an independent game made by a single person.
So Space Invaders, basically.
Except but harder.
Way more bullets.
Think that, but exactly how we explain Japanese rhythm games. Dummy hard.
If Guitar Hero on its easiest difficulty, then Bullet Hell games are the hardest setting on any rhythm game from Japan.
There was even as a joke, there was a computer virus made where to unencrypt your files, you had to beat a Toho game on the hardest difficulty and obtain a certain score. I thought that was hilarious.
That's actually sadism.
We talked at length about rhythm games. Muso, what is this category? Is this the thing from?
That's what we.
That's the hack and slash genre.
Yeah.
There's also the Warriors franchise, which is a big part of the Muso genre. And it's focusing on there's grunt units that you just kill in one hit. It's about crowd control of the battlefield, basically.
Is it okay?
Yeah. There's a lot of spin-offs like Fire Emblem Warriors, Hyrule Warriors. Those are all under Koei Tecmo. We haven't mentioned, but yeah, it's that type of genre.
So just gonna move some categories around. So arcades we've talked about, for the most part, I'd say they're pretty clear. People can kind of entertain themselves at a mall and stuff. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. There's a large variety of games you can play. So yeah, that seems, we've talked at length about arcades. Then there's gachapon games. These are for the most part mobile games. And the entire concept of this is that, insofar as my experience with them, they're generally franchise-based. And what you do is, there are machines in Japan called gachapon machines, which are just things where you insert money, you spin a thing, and you get a random object from inside the machine. And they have different levels of rarity based on, probability. What a gachapon game is a virtual version of that exact concept, where you spend virtual currency to essentially role, which is the term that you used for more or less units, characters that you can then level up and sort of use in combat and stuff like that. That's the typical way that gachapon games tend to work. And there's almost always a element of converting real world currency into virtual currency to purchase. People will go
Yeah.
crazy over
It's
it.
a pay to win.
Not always.
all.
Not
Not all.
always.
Not always. There are ways to.
If you
get
pay,
behind.
you'll get more. That doesn't mean you'll be doing better. There are some games that are balanced a bit differently, I would say. But
Yeah.
See.
on average,
That's called the
it's,
free to play aspect.
Well, and
Yeah.
I heard that there was gonna be a whole episode on gacha
There,
games.
don't spoil that.
Probably will.
We're not supposed to talk about that in the episode. Hey yo, get that out of here in post. Get that shit out of here in post, bro. I want it out.
Okay, yeah.
I want it
Yeah,
out.
Yay.
Yeah, I'll cut it.
Bro, just hit him with the beep.
King of Crim?
Tokyo, Tomare.
Okay, well,
So yeah, big gacha games would include things like Fate Grand Order, Fire Emblem Heroes, what are some other ones that I'm thinking of? Grand Blue Fantasy.
Dragalia Lost, Grand Blue Fantasy, Magikami, Brave Frontier.
Azure
there's
Lane,
a lot.
World's
There's a
Frontline,
lot.
Arknight.
Magia record, but that's getting shut down.
Yeah,
Good
those
thing
are
I don't
some-
play that.
Those are the big ones, and there's a lot of controversies around them because there's like it's similar to the loot box mechanics that people argue over in the West.
Those all big ones.
Mhm.
So there is some controversy there because it can feel like gambling, and for some like there's horror stories where people spend a lot of money on these kinds of games, and so there's a lot we can really unpack there, but we don't have the time right now. So let's.
I think your Japanese is coming out. You stated that way too softly. It is gambling. Let's not sugarcoat it. Let's not sugarcoat it. It's not like gambling. It is gambling.
What if
If
there's
you
a
would-
mark system?
You're still gambling.
Yeah.
There's a definitive gambling aspect because you're not guaranteed in most cases anything for free in most cases.
Okay. We'll talk about this in a future episode, but that's actually a good segue. So
Post.
this international impact. Hey, I never promised anything of games in Japan. From like how have Japanese games influenced the world? What would you guys say? Sort of big picture impact stuff. I mean, there's obviously a lot.
There's one thing we didn't get to touch on. Is the fact that when video games were like started up in like the US, right? It was from a like computer science history perspective, they were mostly relegated to like niche side projects or like stuff like that's only like in academia, right? Because computer development really only happened at the like expense of government funding and with a focus on military applications.
Yeah.
So you had people who were like working on these big missile systems and they're like, on the side, I made this tennis game, right? Well, when it came over to Japan, from the start, it was focused on entertainment. And I think that's like one of the main like aspects of this whole industry. The fact that we're not like focusing on any side applications. This is for like the public, made for the public, and I guess the public swallowed it up, right? And that eventually influenced how Western game development happened.
Well, and I mean, from my experience, I talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think that a lot of not just technological innovations, but also kind of genre innovations or like innovations in the types of games that were created came from Japan. And so I think that that's had a huge impact worldwide, just different experiences that I don't think would have come about were it not for the gaming industry in Japan.
My personal take on it is that there are so many different ways that video games have had an impact on the world, and the two that I can briefly talk about are the stories that they tell and the music. So with regards to the stories that they tell, a lot of games do a fantastic job of really giving you a full story with compelling characters who are their own people. In the case of God of War, for instance, at this point, you see the entire, if you've played or know about the backstory of the main character, where that story begins and where it ends feels more compelling because you see who Kratos, the main character, is as a man and who he's become as a father, for instance. And that's something that people don't really expect from a video game. So just the depth of some of the stories and the character that they develop is so tangibly real
I feel, in the way that they're conveyed.
And you would say this is a Japanese influence in terms of
Not just Japanese. I would say that's overall, but especially Japanese games, because they tend to have more of a story focus. So like in the case of Dark Souls, the story in Dark Souls is huge. There are so many people who just look for like connections and lore between the games. And remember, like we said, that's a Japanese game. Nier Automata, the story for that game, there's plenty of references to philosophy, plenty of, I guess, conversations you can have about it. Yeah, existential themes and comments on the human condition and whatnot. So these games do get deep if you are willing to look for that. And in terms of music, they're just so innovative. Some of the composers have created some of the most iconic themes in history. Koji Kondo creating Nintendo jingles, the Legend of Zelda themes, Nobuo Uematsu being practically a modern day Mozart. Like these guys have a huge array of skills and compositional styles that I think, as someone who does do music, really has changed up the way people look at the music industry and whatnot.
Yeah, no, like these are all very, very much true in terms of how Japan has influenced the world. Like I think that the biggest indicator of Japan's impact in the world of video gaming is that more and more video games these days are becoming less, you can't tell apart as easily what is a Japanese game versus what is a Western game. And I think that level of evolution is sort of the kind of thing that you would expect from a hugely influential source. The fact that they're both sides are sort of imitating each other and taking the best is proof that they're kind of two halves to the industry, and that's really how impactful Japan is as a force in the video game market. It's half the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? And there's a lot you can really, there's a lot, and anything that you think of with regards to the positives or the negatives of video games, you can point about half of those to Japan, if not more. So, you know.
Definitely.
You're going to say something, Ernesto? Or?
No, I just said definitely.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's big differences in attitudes, right? With regards to how, like as Jerry was saying, how people approach video games. Nowadays, we're mostly in the field of entertainment, but even within there, there's like different objectives, like what kind of entertainment you want to provide. Things like Dark Souls have a very different goal in mind than something like, say, the God of War series, which tries to empower you, whereas Dark Souls tries to de-power you. But they still
in God of War, your goal is to neuter everyone else. In Dark Souls, your goal is to not get neutered.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, there's a lot that you can really go into. So I think that's really all that there is to say, unless we have any final thoughts.
Games are good.
Games are good. All right. Well, with that being said, that will wrap up this week's podcast. So thank you all so much for coming into watch. Yep.
I just said indeed.
Okay.
I knew that was going to happen. The moment he said it, I knew you could be like, what?
Well, listen, it's hard to hear people.
You're being a good host. Don't mind me. I'm bullying you. You're being a good host. It's fine.
All right. Well,
hey, we're all hosts here.
Thanks so much for coming to watch all of our podcasts. As always, if you have any suggestions for topics, feel free to fill in the Google form. Or if you can't access the Google form for whatever reason, there's always the YouTube comments. We'll read those because there probably won't be too many of them.
Where's the lie, though?
Yeah, they're just gonna point out like anything got wrong.
All right.
Bro, there's gonna be this one guy in the comments that's just like, actually, this happened in 1973.